Hello, my name is Ryan Wunderlich, and today we're going to be talking about the basics of being a CAD manager. On today's agenda, we're going to talk about what is a CAD manager, the functions of a CAD manager, how to be exceptional, licensing and managing assets, and interfacing with IT. A lot of these things will also apply if you're a BIM manager or a VDC manager. So first, what is a CAD manager? So a CAD manager can be a designer that has the most experience with the software in use, that go-to guy or gal, a person from the IT group that has some CAD experience, to a full-time manager of a team that implements the full range of complex software and systems required by engineering teams. A CAD manager is considered middle management. This term applies to anyone that does not report directly to the company CEO and usually has people reporting to them. You are in the middle. Middle management is where the vast majority of people actually work. It is the environment in which we all live. If you're like most CAD managers, you spend the majority of your time putting out fires and managing processes and people above you and below you. You interact with everyone in the firm. You touch just about every process that creates or delivers the design. So you have a foot in both worlds. You can't just live in one or the other. You're both a leader and a manager. And a CAD manager has to slide in and out of leadership and management roles. They have to perform well in both. When you wear both hats, you must move between leadership and management roles. So a CAD manager has to perform well in both. Leadership expands the vision. Management provides for the execution of that vision. Leadership sets the tone and the style of the team, and management defines the tasks and executes the plan for that team. Leadership creates the high-level plan, and management fills in the details and moves the plan toward completion. This is why it's so critical to understand that you wear two different hats and have two different roles. So now we're going to talk about the functions of a CAD manager. So there are 7 basic functions of a CAD manager, and those are planning, organizing, leading, coordinating, control, staffing, and motivating. So planning. CAD managers should always be planning. You need to have short-term, long-term plans in planning. You plan your days, your weeks, your months. You map out what you need to do today, tomorrow, and next week. And no one thinks more about CAD than the CAD manager, and they should be thinking and planning more than anyone. CAD managers also make plans that are detailed enough to generate actions, but are not overly detailed as to take up too much time during the planning phase. Don't get bogged down in the minutia or over planning of everything. Plan just enough so everyone can see and think about what will happen and what might happen. And if you're just doing it yourself, it's something that you need to be aware of as well. So now that we've done planning, now we have to organize. So CAD managers are called on to organize things. We are usually required to organize processes, procedures, structures, organizations, staff, and budgets. The list keeps on going. There are software tools, books, systems, charts, and so much more to help people get organized. And some people are better than others at organizing. I think it's a sign of the way our brain is wired. So here's what you should be organizing as a bare minimum. You should be organizing your standards. It starts with drawing and project names and location and goes from there. You also should be organizing your server and folder structure, central location for files, a consistent folder structure, ease of use. Also supporting files. You want to keep all of your supporting files together in one place and lock them down so people can't make changes. And the last thing is archives. You need to know where the archives are, how they are organized, and what do you keep over time. So once you have those, now we have leading, and there are 5 T's to CAD leadership. First is tools, relates to the CAD and the tools that you select. Which ones will you use? What will you use them for? Talent, this refers to the people who are going to use the tools. Do they understand how the tools are used? Do they get it? Do they push the limits of those tools? And who are your go-tos when you don't know the answer? And I tell this to people all the time. As a CAD manager, you don't necessarily need to know all the answers, but you need to know who to go to if you don't know. Technology. This is your approach to using the tools and the talent. Who gets to use what? What mix of software can they have? When do they select the tools? And when do you push forward to the great next tech tool? Training. This is how you get everyone there. Provide it and you succeed. If you let training lapse and your best tools and talent go stale, how do you leverage your resources to get good training materials? I have a separate on-demand webinar that talks specifically about a training program, and I highly recommend that you visit that as well. And the last thing is time. You have to provide time for it to work properly. And do you have time to train and implement new tools? And the big thing is Rome wasn't built in a day. CAD management is the same. You're not going to be able to do everything in one day, and you need to be cognizant of that fact that every day you want to move more and more toward the end goal that you've set. Now we're going to talk about coordinating. Coordinating is something that CAD managers have to do every day. You orchestrate, or they orchestrate, the flow of the CAD work, schedule rollouts and downtime, work with multiple departments, shuffle deadlines, and work under pressure. Here's a few areas where coordination is needed. Some are very hands-on and some are very philosophical. For example, the project workflow. The CAD managers need to be a part of the project workflow so that they know what is coming. This is typically seen as critical when it comes to plotting output. Coordinating submittals between projects is also important so that you don't have everyone trying to do submittals and generate paper copies all on the same day. Software rollouts. You will need to coordinate the timing of new software rollouts. Make sure that they avoid any major project submittals and milestones. You do not want to be rolling out brand new software to someone's machine when they are 2 days from final submittal on a project. You want to make sure that you get those updates after major project submittals or in between times when these major dates are critical. And then a hardware refresh. When that new hardware finally arrives, you want to make sure that the desktop swaps are not impeding work production. As we all know, every time we get a new machine, it is not just plug and play. There's always a few tweaks and things like that that we have to do to get our operating system and get our Windows environment back to the way that we like to have it. And you should never do a hardware refresh to a user when they have project deadlines that are looming or anything else like that. You want to make sure that you keep that information, or you want to make sure you keep these rollouts during the best times that you can to have minimal impact on the user. And control. CAD managers need to have control over many things. Done right and it's very motivating, done wrong and it's just annoying. The way we control begins with measurement. Measurement is critical to controlling. Without it, how would we know where improvement or control is needed, and how would we measure our effectiveness in controlling? So we start measuring and tracking areas that you think that need to be controlled. So what needs to be controlled? Here's my usual list. Performance of people, performance of the technology, performance of the systems and standards that you have, and establishing an expectation on CAD production timelines. These are all measurable things, so you want to make sure that you're measuring these things correctly. And staffing. So as part of that, as you saw in the previous slide, we talked about performance of people. So now we're going to talk about staffing. CAD managers must work with and through others to get things done. They have to work with people that they hire, but mostly they work with people they do not hire. Others hire them and they report to other managers, others promote them, and others fire them. Working with employees that other people hire and fire does not mean you have no input into the process at all. You can seek to have a part in the hiring and promotions, and also give indications to the managers of those employees that may not be contributing to the firm in a positive way. Here are some ideas about getting involved in the processes that you do not control. Set up a screening process for new hires. Become part of the interview process. This is really important. If you become part of the interview process, you can head off a lot of these things before there are issues or problems, because you actually know what the capabilities are. You feel you know what the capabilities are of that user. And last, get involved in evaluations. If you have an employee that you are struggling with, make sure you're part of their evaluations, or make sure you let their manager know so that ends up in their information for their evaluation. These are all things that you need to do to help with your staffing. Now, motivating. In order to get those last 6 items to work, we have to have motivation for yourself and for others. Let's get this done. We can do this. It's not as bad as it appears. We need to kick it into high gear. These are some of the motivating statements that might be used in your daily interactions with your team and others. The CAD manager has to motivate people to encourage progress. Motivation is the process we use to spur others into action. So there are 2 types of motivation. There's extrinsic and intrinsic. So extrinsic motivation is when you are motivated by something outside your own thoughts and internal desires. Some examples of this are building teams, asking spot questions, giving rewards, buying lunch, giving others credit when they have good ideas, talking about the big picture and telling them why. And with the extrinsic motivation, you can also help modify intrinsic motivation, because that's a motivation where somebody is motivated by their own internal desires, values, or feelings of duty. The more that you support people and help them to help themselves, the more their intrinsic motivation will ramp up, and then that helps you in the end. So we've talked about all the things. Now we're going to talk about how to be exceptional in this role. So the first thing to understand that there are bad, good, average, and exceptional CAD managers. The thing that separates all of them is their core beliefs and perspectives. This core set of perspectives and beliefs motivate, outlines, defines, and restricts every decision, action, and outcome that you are involved in. So the big thing is that CAD management is a career. It's not just a job title. Constant improvement is a way of life. If you're not looking to constantly improve, you will stagnate and you will end up losing employees, or you will end up losing your edge. CAD managers serve others, not control them. Yes, I talked about control, but we're not looking to control everyone. We are there to serve everyone, and we want to put controls in to help everyone. And people are pivotal to progress. Your people are going to be pivotal on how you progress as a CAD manager and how the whole process goes. Change is to be embraced and managed, not avoided. This is one of the big things that I really talk to people about, is that if you have a change, it's very important to outline why that change is there and what that change is going to do to help everyone. If you change for simply the fact of changing something and you don't give people any reason for the change and you just say, we're going to do this, it's very hard for people to embrace that. If you can tell people exactly why we're making this change, how it's going to be beneficial, and go through that whole process, you can actually help people be on board with that change and embrace it. CAD technology offers empowerment and enables design, but CAD technology is a means to an end. It is not the end goal. CAD technology is one of the facets. You still need to have your talented people. You still need to have, hardware and other things that support that in order for your CAD technology to empower your people to do what you need to do. Procedures and standards are also a means to an end and should not be written in stone. Procedures and standards are there as a guideline, and I talk about this a lot, is that you don't want to ever set your standards in stone. You want to have some flexibility, and if someone has a better idea and you like it, embrace it, make that change, and roll it out. And work is fun. It's not toil, but you have to work at making it fun. So by doing all of these things, you can actually make this job role fun, and you can actually enjoy it as a career. So let's talk about licensing and managing assets. Typically, these are the things that the CAD managers are responsible for. So you must be able to manage your licenses effectively. So you have to manage your current licenses and contracts. You have to provide hard data to leadership to procure more licenses when needed. Make sure that you have the background and make sure that you have an understanding that, hey, we hired 10 new people. We only have 8 licenses. We need to buy 2 more for them. If you still have multi-user licenses, which I know are on the way out, but you still need to understand how to manage the license server. That includes product cascading schemes, understanding multiple seats with different serial numbers of the exact same product and how that interacts. Now that we're primarily going to a standalone or a named user, you need to understand subscription and how to set up users and how to make sure that you get their software up and running correctly. And then you should always have a determination of who gets what software. Make a checklist. Think about, are the software packages I'm handing to people based on the function that they do within the company? Are they based on their position? Or are they based on the experience that they have? You would not want to generally speaking, you would not want to give an entry-level drafter access to the full suite of products and install everything for that user and expect them to know it. You would only want to install the products you want them using and working forward from there. And as they progress within the job role and as they get promoted and things like that, you can add additional software and functionality to their scope. And that way you're limiting what you're exposing them to and helping them focus on what they need to learn first. So in addition to the software side for the Autodesk specific software, now you've got your licenses and now you need to know how you manage your other assets. So one of the big things is hardware. The user's PCs, do you manage those or do you have a separate IT department that manages those? If you still have a license server, do you manage that? Does your IT manage that? And do you have to work with them when you have changes to it? On your network file storage, do you manage that? Does your IT manage that? Do you manage it together? And how do you make changes to that if you don't manage it? And last, what is the process of getting users' rights? So if you have a new user, what's the process in getting them the correct rights to the correct material so that everything works correctly for them? Other things that you need to be considered considering are the infrastructure. What's the bandwidth of your office? What local permissions do the users have on their PCs? Is everyone locked down? Do you have a separate login with admin permission? If you need to install software updates, do you need to contact IT and go through that process? Is everyone just a local admin on their machine? Those things are very critical to know. Where are your data storage servers located? How are they accessed? Things like that. And Active Directory data, how is that populated? What's the process for adding a new user? All of these things you need to know, even if you don't interact with them directly, but you need to know these things in case there are problems later on down the road that you can either assist with or you can have IT take a look at because you know. In addition to that, we're going to talk about software. So we've already talked about Autodesk licenses. So who manages those? You should be the one managing those if you're the CAD manager or BIM manager. And now we're going to talk about other licenses. This includes things like Microsoft Office. If you have other third-party programs, if you're using other CAD design software like Bentley, who manages those licenses and how are they handled? And lastly, deployment builds, right? Do you use an out-of-the-box deployment? You know, basically users install the machine, set it up the way they want. Do you have your own custom content? If you're building a deployment, do you use a deployment build solution? Do you have workarounds and hacks, and why you would use different methods? For example, you may have a custom deployment that works well for users in your office, but remote users have to install the software and set it up manually. And it's important to know the difference. Once you have the deployment, you want to test it, you want to go live to the users, and you want to make sure that you understand the time that's required to not only set up the deployment build and test, but how long it's going to take to roll out to your users. And then other items you need to know. What are the prerequisites of installing certain software? Modifying INI files as necessary to include or exclude certain objects. Those are all the things that you need to know as a CAD manager as far as managing these assets. So I talked about managing the assets. Now we're going to talk about interfacing with IT. This is also one of the most critical roles that a CAD manager plays. So you are the bridge between IT and the design, engineering, CAD departments. Okay, you're the bridge. You're the one that needs to have a foot in both worlds and talk to both of them. So with that comes an understanding with what are the corporate needs? What are your corporate policies? What are your corporate standard builds for PCs? Understanding the user's needs. What does your typical CAD user need for hardware? Do they need a laptop or desktop, and the difference on why they would need that? And then bridging the gap with hard data. So we're talking processor speed, RAM, graphics card, hard drive type. So you need to understand at the core what your people need, and you need to be able to explain and have IT purchase those things specifically for your CAD users, because your corporate hardware standard may be different from the design hardware standard requirements. Your typical office worker does not need an ultra high power CAD machine, where if you've got someone running 3ds Max and they need a full animation suite, something like that, they're going to need a much different class of machine and a much more high powered machine than your standard person who does just accounting. Okay, and those are things you need to know. And the important thing is you want to solve the issues collaboratively with IT. You don't want to drop it in their lap and say, you fix it. You want to work with your IT to help solve any issues that come up with your user's software or their hardware. And you want to do it in a collaborative environment so that IT understands that, yes, you understand them, but you also understand what your engineering or design departments need. So now we're going to talk about service packs, non-Windows software. So this could be service packs for your Autodesk software. This could be service packs for any other software package that is not specifically Microsoft based. Who deploys those service packs and who approves the deployment? Generally speaking, I usually want to be the one who either approves or denies installing CAD updates, because some things may break other processes that we have going on. Some updates have been known to do that. Other updates means that if you're planning a deployment of an update, you need to make sure for things like Revit and Inventor that everyone gets it at the same time. Because if you have multiple users that are using Revit 2019 at different patch levels or different update levels, you're now creating a situation where you can introduce errors into your models and cause problems. And then Microsoft updates. Who deploys your Microsoft updates? Who approves those deployments? And who tests prior to deployment? I've run into this a number of times where you want to make sure that your Microsoft updates are being controlled. And if they're not being controlled, understand that when something happens and it's a Microsoft update, how do you get around that? Do you uninstall the update? All of that information, because what you want to do is make sure that your Microsoft updates are not impacting your user software and causing problems. Next is expected SLAs, service level agreement with hardware issues and software issues. So what's the expected service level agreement that you have with your users for CAD issues, and what does your IT have for generic hardware, software issues, things like that? And a new item I've put in here, which I've always been a part of and didn't think about it until recently, was you need to be a part of the disaster recovery planning. Okay? Every company should have a DR or disaster recovery plan for anything. So we've got pandemic related, natural disaster related, ransomware. Okay? IT may make all of these decisions as far as what they're going to do for disaster recovery planning, but you need to be involved in that as well, because your input is critical to keep your CAD users up and running effectively, and to make sure that if there is a disaster, how do you manage that disaster and keep everything going the way we expect it to and keep your users up and functional. So those are all of the things that we need to talk about as being a CAD manager, and those are all the basic functions that you should be looking at regularly. And with that, I just wanted to say thank you and have a great rest of your day.